Oh,
Good evening, everyone. We are pleased that you have joined us this evening for this learning event,
love this.
this opportunity to share about what is happening in Palestine. Um, my name is Mick Summers. I'm one of the staff at Atlantic Coast Conference. And so my role this evening is merely to introduce our speakers, and then we will turn it over to them so that they can share for what we intend to keep to about an hour. And so if there are questions that you may want to pose to either Michael or to Amy, I would encourage you to send them an individual text, and they will see that. Depending upon the number of questions that are sent to them, they may or may not be able to get to all of them, but we will encourage them to monitor those chat questions that may come their way as the evening goes on. So we do have two people joining us this evening. Michael George is a social studies teacher at Lancaster Mennonite High School here in Lancaster. He attends Landisville Mennonite Church. He is Palestinian-American. He was born here in Lancaster area. His father was born in Lydda, Palestine. And Michael also works with the MennoPIN organization, which is the Mennonite Palestinian Israeli Network. And he gives energy to the Twinning with Gaza initiative, which tries to pair up some congregations there and here to break down walls and to build communication. Amy Yoder McGloughlin has been a pastor at Frazer Mennonite Church since 2018. She had pastored at Germantown prior to that, and Amy has been deeply involved in the Community Peacemaker Teams, formerly Christian Peacemaker Teams, has led numerous delegations to Israel-Palestine, and was in fact in country with a delegation this year when this conflict this time around broke out. And so Amy will be able to share with us some of her experience on getting out of the country, and then talk more broadly about the situation at play there. Amy, I will turn it over to you at this point, and you and Michael will have the evening.
Thank you, Mick. And thanks to ACC for the invitation. I am hoping that my dogs behave themselves. I'm home alone with just me and the dogs, so hopefully they'll stay good and quiet for us. So as Mick said, I was in the West Bank when the war broke out 26 days ago. I was leading a delegation with Community Peacemaker Teams. This is something I do quite regularly. And we were doing a delegation specifically working on practicing our accompaniment skills. So what does it mean to walk alongside Palestinians in the West Bank? And then what does that mean for us to bring that home and do that in the communities where we live? So we're focused on solidarity, but thankfully we were also focused on joy. How do we find joy in difficult times to fill up our reserves for when difficulties come? So Saturday morning, I was in Hebron with my delegation and the CPT team when we learned that the war broke out. And the CPT team, which is made up of Palestinians who are local to Hebron, they have been born and raised there. They were of one mind that the delegation needed to get out of Hebron before checkpoints started to close and we were locked in the West Bank. So we made a plan to head to Jerusalem and packed all our things up and went to leave the old city, but were barred from leaving for a while because soldiers had already started to shut down the old city and didn't want us to leave for our own security. I'm not quite sure, but we managed to convince the soldiers that we should get out a different way. And actually the Palestinian team are the ones that negotiated that for us. And they found us transportation to Bethlehem, where we were going to transfer to a bus there. And there we learned that the checkpoints had already closed, at least the driving ones. So we went to the checkpoint 300, which is a famous checkpoint in the West Bank. Very big, lots of foot traffic goes through there. We were hoping that it would be open for foot traffic, and we were turned away there as well. So we ended up staying in Bethlehem for 2 days at a hostel that we usually stay at, and we're hosted by a beautiful evangelical Palestinian-American family there. Every night we were in Bethlehem, we heard jets flying overhead on their way to Gaza, and we knew exactly what that meant. That was it was very painful just knowing that we were in the West Bank, war was going on 50 miles away, and we just felt so helpless. But we had decided that we would stay in Bethlehem until checkpoints opened, and on Friday we would fly out of Tel Aviv and go home. Looking back, that seems like such a ridiculous pipe dream, but we were working with the information that we had. But by Monday, our hosts said to us that they thought that we should try to get out of the West Bank as soon as we could. They were worried about collective punishment, and they were worried that we would be stuck there for a long time. So the family member that we were staying with had us go with them to a hotel because they thought they could get us on a bus with some other tourists out of the West Bank. But the bus driver didn't want to let us on because they didn't want to add to the numbers that they had told the military they were bringing out. So our host, his name was Bulos, started taking us to the checkpoints to see if they were open. We went back to checkpoint 300. It was closed still. So we went to another checkpoint that was basically like a pile of rubble across a street. And it was high enough that we could see that there were Jeeps over there and that the soldiers, the tops of their guns were there. And my host thought we would not be able to get through there, but I decided that I would give it a try. So I took one of the other members of my delegation who had lived in apartheid South Africa many years ago. She and I went to the soldiers with our passports held high and just announced that we were American citizens, and with some negotiation, they let us through. I want to pause and say that comes with a lot of privilege for me to be able to do that, and I feel the weight of that privilege. To be able to do that as a white person, as a person holding an American passport, is not something that my Palestinian friends or hosts would be able to do. To do that as a Black American is not something that would be possible. So I feel the weight of that. Once we crossed the checkpoint, my host, Bulos, had called us a cab, and they brought us to Jerusalem. At this point, this was Monday, we were still thinking we could get out by Friday. But by Tuesday night, Hamas was calling for a general strike on Friday, and they were calling for Palestinian men to start attacking soldiers. And as Americans whose government is supporting this war, we felt like we were at risk. So I called some friends who let us know that the Jordanian checkpoints would be open on Wednesday, and they called us a taxi. Thank God for connections and friends in the West Bank and in Jerusalem. And we got through Jordan on Wednesday. So by Wednesday at 2:00, we were at the airport, and by midnight we were all flying home. So that was 5 days in occupied territory after the war started. 5 days of hearing airplanes overhead at night, 5 days of watching the war and sitting with Palestinians who were scared and did not know what was next. Again, I just feel the heaviness of being able to get out when so many friends, that's just not a possibility for them. Just so you all know a little bit about Community Peacemaker Teams. They have been in Hebron since 1995 at the invitation of the local government there to monitor for human rights violations, to accompany Palestinian children in and out of checkpoints on their way back and forth from school, to monitor the mosque checkpoints, and to respond to any emergencies that come up in the community for Palestinians. So they've been doing that for almost 30 years. And I've been really honored to be able to walk with so many of them in the last 10 years. That's what's happening, or what happened early on in the West Bank. I'm going to hand it over to Michael so he can talk a little bit about his family and about what's happening in Gaza. Oh, you're muted, Michael.
All right. I'm going to get my picture up here, or my presentation. All right. So, yeah, my name is Michael George, and I'm just going to share a little bit about our MennoPIN and twinning with Gaza. And so the main objective I have is going to be to show you pictures of people that we've gotten to know in Gaza, and just to show you their humanity. But first, I wanted to say a little bit about just why I got involved in MennoPIN and Gaza. So this is a picture of my grandparents, Isa and Zahiya Abdullah, and they were from Lidda, Palestine. So it's basically in between Jerusalem and the Mediterranean Sea. And so they would have been living in what is now what became the state of Israel. And so in 1948, my father was about 6 years old, and this is actually a picture of refugees from Lidda in 1948. Some of these children would be around my father's age at the time. So to skip ahead, my father and his family moved to Jordan, and my dad grew up in Amman, Jordan. And Amy was talking about Hebron, and so Hebron is an important place for my family's story. After high school, my father taught at an orphanage in Hebron that was run by two Mennonite twin sisters, Ada and Ida Stolzfus from Morgantown, Pennsylvania. And they asked him if he wanted to go to Eastern Mennonite College, and he did, and that's where he met my mother, and that's where, yeah, that's how I'm an Arab an Arab Mennonite. And this is a picture of my father before coming to Eastern Mennonite College. So all of his family would be Jordanian, but obviously they're Palestinian refugees living in Jordan. And this is a picture of me and my brother and my grandma. And this was, I don't know, I was probably 3 or 4 years old, and I only got to meet her a little bit. But so I'm always proud to be like a grand son of Palestinian refugees. So a few years ago, in 2017, the Mennonite Church USA adopted the Seeking Peace in Israel and Palestine resolution. And it was a unique resolution because it both address the injustices of military occupation, and also as well as addressing anti-Semitism. So one of the things that grew out of this, and I want to give Jonathan Katab credit. He's a Mennonite lawyer, Palestinian lawyer, and he felt it was really necessary to deal or to relate to Gaza. And so he came up with the idea of twinning or setting up congregations with groups in Gaza. So this is 2015 in Gaza. Gaza is a place with abject poverty. It's been under Israeli blockade for 17, 18 years, and limited food, limited electricity, limited everything. And so even before the bombing that has taken place in the last month, Gaza was not, it's one of the most densely populated places in the world with just impoverished people. Most of the people living there are refugees. So our twinning partners, and I'm excited to show you, well, I'm both excited to show you the pictures because we've gotten to know them so well, and they're doing some really amazing work. It's also obviously I can't be sure, how, if the people are okay in the pictures that you see, or if the organizations will go on. So I wanted to start off with Youth Vision Society in Gaza, and this is Tariq Abu Halima. He was initially our go-to at Youth Vision Society, and he became our main contact in the Twinning with Gaza program. We gotten to know him so well that he ended up coming to graduate school at Bluffton University, and he's now co-directing their Peace Art Center there. And so just a plug, next Saturday, I think the 11th, I'm going to be interviewing him. MennoPIN is going to have a Zoom. So if you'd like to hear from a Gazan about what it's like to grow up in Gaza and also what's happening there, that'll be next Saturday. I just wanted to show you some images of what Youth Vision Society does. It has a lot of programs. Here you see for youth, photography courses. And I should have said this, Youth Vision Society was twinning with Manhattan Mennonite Church in Kansas. And this was actually a joint venture between Youth Vision Society and Manhattan Mennonite. They gave care boxes to people in the refugee camps. You may be familiar with Edward Said. Edward Said Library is part of the Youth Vision Society. They had music lessons. And so it's something you may not, think of that's going on in Gaza, but, everyday life with people and art and children and school. Singing. Through my connection with Tariq at Youth Vision Society, a few summers ago, I was asked to help. All of these young people are English language majors, and they were part of a program where they were writing about living in Gaza. And so 5 of these young people I helped to sort of mentor as writers and help them to write their stories in English. One of them was this young man, Ahmed, and Ahmed has a very interesting story. He's actually he's Ukrainian Palestinian. So his father went to Ukraine to study, and his mother, or excuse me, yeah, his father met his mother, a Ukrainian woman. They moved back to Gaza and had Ahmed. And Ahmed's story, or his essay, was just sort of asking the question why the world is sympathetic to his mother's side with Ukraine being bombed, but the world is not sympathetic to what he's experiencing in Gaza. Gaza YMCA. This is actually, there's a very, very small Christian community in Gaza. Out of about 2.3 million people, it's less than 1,000 people. This is one of them. This is Suhail. He was our main contact at the Gaza YMCA, and they twinned with the Fellowship of Hope in Elkhart, Indiana. And also my father, Elias, who's joining us tonight, and myself have joined in on a lot of their meetings. And they're just wonderful when we get to meet with Suhail. We have not heard from Suhail since the beginning of the bombing. I'm hopeful he's just lost contact in terms of electricity, and that's what I'm hoping. So the Gaza YMCA is an amazing organization that brings Christians and Muslims together, and there's art that they do. There's a Christmas tree lighting ceremony every year in Gaza, in the Gaza YMCA. And so again, you'll have Christians and Muslims coming together and celebrating Christmas. And, here you see an art show and dancing. And something you might not think of going on in Gaza is basketball, basketball leagues. And girls basketball. And I like this picture because just from their dress, you can tell some of them are Christian and some of them are Muslim. And even playing tug of war. And here, before even as a Palestinian American, I had this image of Gaza before doing the Twinning with Gaza program. And this is just a picture that I don't think of when I think of Gaza. I don't think of a girls basketball team celebrating a championship. And this is every summer, they have a huge camp for children. And we had the opportunity, along with the Fellowship of Hope, to financially support it. The last organization that I'll talk about is the Pulse of Peace Association for Psychosocial and Mental Health. This is the one that at Landisville Mennonite, the organization that we've twinned with. And it's been really interesting. We actually, I'd say for maybe a year or so, we met bi-monthly. And then we actually had a few times where a Sunday school or middle school Sunday school class met with some of their children. And it was an interesting meeting. This is Muhammad. Muhammad was our main contact at the Pulse of Peace. And if you may have read the blog I posted on MC USA website. This is the young man who texted me that basically people are waiting to be bombed or waiting to die from the bombs of the pilots. And it's horrible, obviously, to hear this. And especially, he's such, you can maybe tell, he's such a gregarious, happy guy. And I had this really, I get maybe a text every week from him. And I had a surreal experience the other day. He asked me how I was doing. While he's being bombed, he asked me how he's doing, how I'm doing, and I didn't know how quite to respond. This is Muhammad and some of the people at the Pulse of Peace meeting. And the Pulse of Peace is basically to help children deal with the trauma of living under constant siege and blockade and violence. And so you can see they work a lot with children. The man on the left, I think, is like the lead psychologist there. And again, just doing activities to help children deal with trauma. This is a picture of me at Landisville Mennonite Church talking about the Pulse of Peace. There's nothing really great about this picture. The reason I'm showing it is that I was looking on their Facebook page, and this is a picture I sent Muhammad, and they had posted this picture to their website. So just contact with the outside world is a huge thing for them. So just seeing their picture in the United States is a huge thing for them. And I think this is the last one. So again, just to appreciate the humanity of the people living in Gaza. Yeah, so those are some pictures of the people that we've been forming relationships with the last 3 years.
Thank you, Michael. I know it has to be so hard to watch this news and know people in Gaza and have relationships and friendships there. I want to invite folks, if you have questions, to add them to the chat, and Michael and I will try to answer them. And while we're waiting on questions, I know we've been hearing a lot about Gaza. Over 9,000 dead and more to come, I'm sure, given the humanitarian crisis on the ground. And while all eyes are on Gaza, in the West Bank, over 100 Palestinians have been killed by settler or soldier attacks. Most recently, the communities in the South Hebron Hills have been suffering and threatened, and some have had to abandon their villages. So at this time, when folks are working on or hoping to go harvest olives, many are unable to do that because they are facing so many threats of violence. So both the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, while they're very different places, are facing different kinds of suffering right now.
Amy, I was wondering, I mean, I showed some pictures of Gaza, but I was in the West Bank this summer for a week as well. And I went to Hebron just as part of a group that I actually bumped into. Actually, one of our twinning partners, Dave Jansen from Fellowship of Hope in Elkhart. I sort of randomly bumped into their group and just tagged along. But I would say within the West Bank itself, Hebron was by far the most tense situation that I experienced there. Could you say a little bit about in terms of like the settlements? It's not only like territory, like in terms of controlling land. It's also like literally like on top of each other, like in terms of like settlements directly above the market.
Yeah, so in Hebron, there are 4 settlements within the Palestinian city. So several hundred Israeli settlers are actually living inside of this Palestinian city. And that makes things very tense. There are certain streets that Palestinians are not permitted to walk on, and lots of checkpoints. And then there are about 3,000 soldiers there to protect the settlers that live in and around Hebron. So it's a very, very tense city. Depending on the brigade that's in the city, things can be more or less violent. Last year when I was there, we were constantly dealing with young children that have been detained at checkpoints on their way to or from school, sometimes for hours at a time, for no apparent reason except the soldiers wanted information about who was throwing rocks. And then, later on in the day, we would face like multiple young men, my son's age, like 22, 23 years old, who were getting arrested, detained, or beat up by soldiers just for walking through the city. So it's a very, very tense place to be. Go ahead, Michael.
There's a question about sharing about how the Twinning in Gaza program got its start. And I think I'd mentioned the name Jonathan Katab, who is on MennoPIN. He's a Palestinian-American lawyer, and he's actually and you can correct, he's the executive director of FASNA, which is Friends of Sabeel North America. And so, and that's it's a Christian, Palestinian Christian advocacy organization. And he's written several books. One of the books is Beyond the Two-State Solution, talking basically about his dream of living in like a one democratic state between the two people. But he's very and he would say this, his words would be, he's no apologist for Hamas, but they are sort of the group in power. We're the most powerful group in Gaza, and they need to be like brought to the table if there's going to be peace. Like you can't make peace with you have to make peace with the people that you're having conflict with. That would be his opinion. And also he wanted to, obviously the vast majority of the people in Gaza are not members of Hamas and are just trying to survive day to day. And so we actually, it took a long time to get it started because we were trying to get some type of connection there. And it's just hard because it's cut off from the world. And so we ended up, thankfully, meeting with Tariq and others at the Youth Vision Society. And so we met with him for months, and then we began to trust him and he trusted us. And so he really became our big connection there. But it was a lot of work and a big commitment. And I think when it was actually, and it was during COVID, and I think we expected that perhaps when COVID was over that this program would really grow a lot. And it may have been that just the being at home a lot enabled us to even start the program, because it takes a lot of commitment to meet twice a month, usually on Sunday or Saturday morning. But yeah, it grew, and then Tarek came to the United States and he gave a seminar at MC USA convention this summer. Yeah, and so it's been great in terms of also meeting other people throughout the country. Like I said, we have groups in Kansas and Indiana and Pennsylvania. Yeah.
Michael, would you be able to add to the chat information about the MennoPIN Zoom that's coming up? Somebody
Yes.
asked.
Yeah, that I'm actually publicizing that. If I'm technologically capable, I'll put it in the Zoom. But if not, you'll get it through like your church or yeah. But I'll try.
Okay. Someone was asking about Hamas, and maybe we can try to talk a little bit about them. It's a little tricky to talk about Hamas as because it's more than, it's like a political party and it's also the government. So it's more than just Democrat, Republican kind of things that we think of here. It's kind of the best analogy I can think of for Hamas is they're kind of like the Black Panthers back in the day. So they were doing feeding programs, and they also had this militant wing. Hamas is, part of the infrastructure of Gaza. So responsible for hospitals and food and caring for their community. And there's also this wing that is responsible for throwing bombs at Israel. And maybe Michael might describe that a little differently. That's kind of how I understand it. Maybe you have a better analogy.
I mean, I would not claim to be an expert on that, but in terms of Palestine, there's basically a divide governmentally between the West Bank, which is ruled by Fatah, and then Hamas in the Gaza Strip. And my dad can correct me if I say anything wrong, but so Hamas is more of a like a Islamist, like a religious nationalist movement, whereas Fatah in the West Bank would be more of like the traditional secular Arab nationalism or Palestinian nationalism of like Yasser Arafat and the PLO. And literally Hamas and Fatah have gotten into wars, like into violence. And so basically Hamas, Palestinian many years, like 10, 15 years ago, had an election, and Hamas actually beat Fatah. And then the government in Ramallah basically was like, no, we're not doing that, and like basically disregarded the election. Yeah, but so I see a question about, can you talk about why Hamas has a stronghold in Gaza? So I think, and this is just from the outside, I think Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank feel just left behind and disregarded. And so I think that, I can't say, I speak only for myself. I don't speak for the millions of Palestinians in the West Bank or Gaza, but what I would say is they're so desperate just to live a life that at least they see Hamas doing something, whereas in the West Bank, the government may be seen as just collaborating with the Israelis. So yeah, it's a very complex situation.
One of the other questions was from Tim. I've heard reports from 2 Israeli women who are hostages that their captors treated them humanely. Does this surprise you? Can examples of humanity like this be used for peace?
I mean, I think there's a lot better examples that we can come up with. I mean, for me, thinking of the Israeli hostages and what their families are going through right now. Yeah, that's, I mean, I I just showed pictures, trying to accentuate the humanity of people in Gaza, Palestinians there. And I don't know if you can say that they're sort of like Hamas is treating them humanely just because they took them captive. You can say something, you might think differently, Amy.
No, it feels complicated to think about that, like they're hostages. I mean, for me, I think about all of the moments of grace and hospitality that were extended to me by Palestinians that um, should have been trying to get gas or food before it ran out, and they were helping my group of Americans get out of the West Bank. Like that to me is a great example of the hospitality of Palestinians, and one that really humbles me when I think about coming back to this culture of suspicion and hurry. So to me, those are the examples of humanity that that I want to highlight. Mick asked, has there been a lessening of support for Palestinians among the broader Arab world?
Yeah, and I can probably speak to that a little. I think definitely in the last few decades, there has been, in terms of, I mean, one of the reasons some people think that Hamas had this major attack was because of like normalization meetings between Israel and Saudi Arabia. And so a lot of, especially like the oil states, the wealthy oil states, are trying to basically integrate themselves into the world economy. Um, so in many ways, Palestine is not as big of an issue in terms of the leaders. Now, in terms of just the people in the countries, Palestine has never not been important. Yeah, so like, just for example, at the World Cup in Qatar, in an Arab country, there was just so much support for Palestine there, but not necessarily among the elites, but just the people there. So this conflict definitely will, we'll see what happens in terms of normalization. I think the U.S. government wants to keep normalizing, but I don't know if that will fly anymore with what's going on in terms of the Arab countries' domestic politics.
Other questions, friends?
One thing that I just that I'm thinking of is one challenge of twinning was the language barrier, and so the two of the places that really thrived, we had really good, like, great English speakers on their end. For ours, with Muhammad, he spoke a little English, but it was an interesting situation because my dad would translate, and he's a great translator, and he probably wouldn't mind me saying his hearing's not as good as it used to be. And so, there were some just really funny moments of him trying to work with Muhammad, and yeah, and Muhammad enjoyed it as well, and so but it was nice. I hope. I mean, it feels bizarre that saying, I hope I can see him again. That he survives this. I'm sort of a little numb about it because it's yeah, it's horrible. And yeah.
No, go ahead.
Well, and also, like, I've thought a lot, this is on my mind 24/7, and just sort of like, what do I, say to people? And like, I'm also like, for the 1,300 or 1,400 Israelis who were killed, it's just horrible. It's awful. And I feel like it's so hard to have a conversation on this topic, because a lot of the time people that may not have, or people that may not be trying to make peace or have different motives than peace, sort of try to catch people saying the wrong thing. And I think that stops people from getting involved in the issue, because you don't want to be accused of anti-Semitism or things like that. And I mean, and anti-Semitism is real, and it's been increasing in the West. But I reject the notion that it's necessarily a Palestinian thing. It's a very, when you go there, you understand it's just a completely different context. And if you haven't been there, it's difficult to understand. So go to Palestine and Israel if you have a chance.
Couple comments here. First of all, Mick says that the U.S. just approved $14 billion in support for Israel about an hour ago. And then Rachel asked next, so what do we do, those of us in the U.S.? And I'll tell you what I'm hearing from Palestinians is amplify the message on social media. Don't stop talking about it. Call your representatives. Palestinians, by the way, understand our government better than we do. It's a real embarrassment, honestly. Keep having hard conversations. There was just as Tammy says in the chat, there was just a big protest at 30th Street Station. They shut down the train station. That happened in New York. It's happening in DC. There's a big march in DC on Saturday. Just get out there. My friend who's also a Mennonite was saying that this is a great opportunity for Mennonites, those of us who come from the radical Reformation, who have been very vocal in the 1500s about who we are and what we believe. This is not the time for us to get quiet. We have to keep talking about it and amplifying this message.
And I think I'm still a little the Mennonite seeking peace in Israel and Palestine. As a Palestinian, I'm still a little, not question. I was a little uneasy with the associating not resisting, like going against occupation, like making a statement against occupation, and then sort of lumping anti-Semitism into that, because I don't necessarily, I have some issues with that. But I think as Mennonites, as a traditional peace church, and that we have a group working with MennoPIN with twinning with Gaza, but there's also, and Amy, you're on this, right? The Could you say a little
Mennonite.
bit about
Oh yeah, Mennonite Jewish Relations is an organization that came out of this resolution in 2017, recognizing that that supporting Palestine isn't anti-Semitic, but that Mennonites and the Jewish community have some points of friction, and one of them is Palestine, and that if you're looking at certain definitions of anti-Semitism, criticizing the state of Israel and criticizing Zionism by some definitions is considered anti-Semitic. And so if we're out the gate opposing the occupation and opposing Zionism, then people might perceive us as being anti-Semitic. So there's a lot of work that we have in conversation and educating each other around what those things mean.
let's see, the next, what have we heard about the level of Israeli support for driving the Palestinian people out of Gaza into Egypt? There was recently a report floated proposing that as the best of three options, are we confident the U.S. and Egypt will oppose this? I'm not confident about the United States in that they'll oppose anything, actually. Yeah, I've been surprised at sort of, and maybe I shouldn't have been surprised, but I've been surprised at the sort of blank slate or blank check that has been written, especially, and not getting too political. I mean, this is an extreme right wing Israeli government, even for Israel. Benjamin Netanyahu made a deal with the far right settlers, and they're basically in control. And the minute I heard what President Biden was saying, I knew it was going to be bad, because they're not going to stop without international, without the international community standing up.
And isn't it interesting, Michael, that moving, millions of people to Egypt is the solution rather than a ceasefire? Like that's the thing that upsets me, is that Israel's proposing solutions to this that involve moving people off the land. Interesting. But also abdicating responsibility for people by giving them to some other country. And that just, so many levels of problems there for me.
Yeah. And also, I think, I know I've just said what I said, but in terms of politically, just straight politics, you could maybe argue that Biden's making the right choice in America with the amount of Christian Zionism. I don't know. I mean, I would hate to think that it is politically the right choice, but I don't know. They have a lot of people taking polls and knowing what they want to do in order to get elected.
A question from Heather Lehman is, there's a fair amount of Israeli disillusionment with their own government up until this fall. What are you hearing from moderate Israelis now about the root causes of this war and their own government? Oh, I don't have relationships with a ton of Israelis, but I do with like mainline Jewish folks, and folks have gone very nationalist because this was a national tragedy. Everyone is very pro-Israel. Now that's maybe not everyone is an extreme, but like a lot of people are very pro-Israel, very focused on getting hostages out, and denying that this is a genocide, denying this is apartheid. And that has been really difficult to observe in terms of interfaith relations. I feel like I've spent, a decade or more working on relationships with the Jewish and the Muslim community, building those relationships to do social justice work. And my relationship with my local Jewish community is very strained right now because they know that I do a lot of work in Palestine, and I've seen the move towards nationalism. So I don't, it's been very discouraging. I don't know if you have more to add to that, Michael.
I mean, yeah, I mean, I think that's, I just saw one post, sort of the fervor in the US following 9/11. And I think it would be, it's even, not even more, but in terms, when you go to the West Bank and Israel, like security, or their Israeli security, is like the number one thing in your face, constant, 24/7. And so, like, for this to have happened somehow, that this attack from Gaza, with all of the you know, military and security efforts, and it's just, it's beyond comprehension about how this could have happened. And yeah, so they're obviously, you know, joining together and putting politics aside, as we did after 9/11 in the US.
Amy, will you take a direct question?
Okay.
Are you okay with that? This is Steve Jones, and I'm with Hetty Reese.
Yeah.
What's it going to take to get Biden to admit the fact that the United States is complicit in genocide and apartheid, and it's an international war crime? I mean, we have a huge rally coming up this weekend in DC. Probably know about that. We have several people from Shalom Mennonite that are going to be there. But I don't know if that's going to make a difference. I mean, this man, Biden, just basically says, you know, we're not going to ask for a ceasefire because then it'll just give Hamas more time to put their act together, and it'll be worse. And I am just so angry and so broken. And I know almost everybody probably is watching this feels the same way, including you and Michael must. And I'm just furious. And I don't know how to get this man to, I told him, I said, Biden, if you don't get this ceasefire, I'm not voting for you again. I've said the same thing to Senators Kaine and Warner in this week. And a lot of people from Shalom has written letters, and we've made phone calls repeatedly. But I don't know. I mean, it's tearing me up, just like it is you, Michael. It's tearing me up.
Yeah, I would say, I mean, for me, you know, there's been a lot of moments of despair where I'm like, where I pretty much know that they might be destroyed in Gaza no matter what I do. But I think that then the two things I think of are like my faith. Like, I need to, regardless of you know, the likelihood or whatever, like, I need to stand up for what's right and how I think Jesus would view the situation. And also that you know, there's people in Gaza that are helpless, and also just like for the record, for your like own moral clarity, you know, looking back, where, you know, what was your position when this was happening? Yeah.
I also think the thing that is interesting to me is that my friends in the West Bank are so encouraged by what they see happening in the United States. Even if Biden hasn't changed his mind, for them to see thousands of people marching in the street gives them courage and hope. And so I have to keep doing it. Yeah, it's the only thing I know to do right now.
And I think that it might have been George Stoltzfus that asked if I was going to send the link out. I have not improved my technology in the last 10 minutes, but I'll make sure that it is actually, it's coming out in next week's piecemeal of MC USA. And it'll also be coming out through like just congregational and conference channels.
So look out for it. It'll be a good conversation, I'm sure.
I had told Michael and Amy as we were preparing for this evening that this is one of those topics that to try to do a short overview within an hour can maybe be done, but it's also something that could take many days to talk about. And certainly the history of this situation stretches back for many decades. And I encourage you, my hunch is most of you that joined us this evening have an interest in this and have reviewed that. But if you are looking for something, please take the time to dig into the history of what has happened in Israel-Palestine over the years and write those letters and make those phone calls and have your voice be heard. Thank you very much to Amy and to Michael for what they have provided for us this evening. Thank you for all of you who have joined in for us at this time. We want to be mindful of the time that we have set for ourselves. And so we will bid you farewell at this hour.
Thank you for
Blessings
being
on you
here,
all.
friends.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.